Hello and welcome to PACO's Episode 6, Enterprise Asset Management for Infrastructure Transportation Projects. I have with me Doug Stevenson from WSP that will be joining us in this conversation. Douglas, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, before we get into the meats and bones, I'd like to talk a little bit about, Doug, your journey into this field, and just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I would say it probably started out as a kid. My dad was a mechanic, had an excellent set of tools, and so we would have to maintain our own cars, and just really took to that at a young age, enjoyed it. Joined the Navy, served 9 years in the Navy as a nuclear-powered machinist mate, working in the engine room on the power plant and the reactor plant.
Really? That's impressive.
Yeah. It was definitely an experience for sure. I like to say great place to be from, not such a great place to be because the duty it's definitely intense. But the Navy had a very extensive preventive maintenance program, right? And that's where I started to really develop some ideas and opinions on what is right and what is wrong with a good maintenance plan and asset management in general. Got out of the Navy, got a mechanical engineering degree, spent a little bit of time at a manufacturing plant as a manufacturing engineer.
Excellent.
And then as a design engineer for Newport News Shipbuilding, as a design engineer for two systems in the power plant for what is now the Gerald Ford, latest, greatest aircraft carrier design. And again, had another opportunity to visit the Navy's preventive maintenance program. And for that ship's design, my job, along with designing two systems, was to design the maintenance plan for those two systems. And so the Navy was interested in us implementing reliability-centered maintenance practices.
Interesting.
And condition-based maintenance practices for the whole engine room. And so received training on both of those methodologies and used them to design the two systems that I owned. Newport News Shipbuilding, they were kind enough to pay for me to go to William & Mary and get an MBA. And then IBM recruited me to come up to the DC area and join their enterprise asset management practice. And so spent 11 years there. Joined right after IBM had purchased MRO software, which is at that time the vendor that owned Maximo. And so Maximo came into IBM, one of the leading industry enterprise asset management systems.
Right. And
so started to work with that, and particularly in transit, and got an opportunity to work with Bombardier Transportation, Long Island Railroad, Washington Metro, and a couple other organizations, and just really steered my career from that point forward. Enterprise asset management in transit just seemed like a really good fit for me.
Great. Wow, what a story. And then, it's just interesting to understand the shipbuilding and that process of the engine. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm just curious as to how that works.
So for the Ford, this was the first new redesign of an aircraft carrier. The Navy came to Newport News Shipbuilding with some very general requirements. They wanted the ship to be faster, lighter, have less of a draft so it could go more places in the world. They wanted reduced manning, and they wanted greater periods between shipyard availability. So everything before the Ford is a Nimitz-class carrier, and they all have to go into a shipyard once every 6 years.
Oh, okay.
They wanted it to go to 8 years. And so those were our design requirements. And as long as we were meeting them, we kind of had carte blanche on how we designed the system. Did some very innovative things that, unfortunately can't talk about, right? But it was to meet those goals, right? And some of those things are diametrically opposed, right? Less manning. They wanted us to design our systems to allow less manning. So that means less operators, less maintenance. But they also wanted less weight, right? And so normally when you think less personnel, you think more automated, right?
Right.
Which adds weight, right? And so we had to figure out ways to meet, kind of these competing requirements, right? And some of the ways we made it, we removed flanged connections, right? Basically in the engine room, everything, all the pipe fittings, all the valves, all the pumps, they have flanged fittings with bolts, right? And we removed those so that, less leak potential, less maintenance potential, less weight.
So it's just really problem solving.
Totally.
Which segues straight into what you're doing today.
Yeah. Very fun job. And I'm dying to see how that design worked out, but unfortunately I don't work for the Navy anymore, and just have to hear, if anything pops up in the news, but, because the systems are confidential in nature, I really don't get an opportunity to hear how things work.
But that's, it's a great background, and I can see how that positioned you to your current job. And for the audience, Doug is currently Senior Vice President at WSP on Asset Management Advisory Services. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing right now with WSP and talk a little bit about WSP? They're a big firm. Everyone knows about them, but maybe some of you don't. So this is the opportunity.
Sure. So WSP, in my unbiased opinion, greatest engineering firm in the world. Most of what we do, I would say, is either building or infrastructure side engineering. When I first came to WSP, two of the projects that I was just blown away that we were a part of, first and foremost, the World Trade Center, big part of that design and build, as well as the Oculus, which, if anybody's ever been, just beautiful, beautiful design, and really mind-boggling how quickly they had that back up and running, that whole, intersection there. Other thing that WSP worked on that I just found very impressive. Are you familiar with the aqueduct that used to be in Seattle? That's what they called the highway that basically separated the waterfront from the city. And it was this elevated highway that went through there.
Interesting.
And if you visited Seattle while that was there, you felt that separation.
Wow.
Right? And so Seattle hired WSP to design and lead the project to basically replace that with a tunnel system. And so now the city is completely connected. There's not a elevated highway dividing the waterfront from the rest of the city. It's all done through tunnels. And I just thought that was very impressive.
The scale of that project must...
And I was impressed by how quickly it got done as well. Things these days, particularly in large cities, it's hard to move things quickly. But both those projects, I felt like, they were done quickly. We are structured basically with verticals for what I would call different industries. We have one that we call PMCM, which is about project and construction management for large projects like those two I was just talking about. We have transportation and infrastructure, which deals with transit and state highways and that sort of thing. We have energy and water, a federal practice, and then the practice that I'm in, which is advisory services. And I like to look at it as advisory services is kind of like our consulting branch. And we do the McKinsey type and I would say a little bit more tactical type consulting, boots on the ground type things for our clients. And we do it across all verticals. So that's where I am. And within advisory services, I am in our asset management group. So I have a partner. I lead the business strategy side for asset management, and my partner leads the operations, Elizabeth Concho, and she's right out of here in One Penn Center.
Great. And then, as you know, when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me that you provide as a consulting services, sort of advisory services to the other business units.
Correct. Yes.
And that's interesting. So you're doing enterprise asset management in transportation and across other industries, which are all do the same process.
Yep. Very, very related. I mean, everybody that is reliant on heavy machinery or asset intensive industries, they all need asset management and maintenance management services. So, yep.
Do you have any stories about any juicy stories about a failed asset or something that stayed longer than their useful life, or any examples you'd like to share?
The biggest issue from a performance perspective with buses would be, first of all, you want them to be available for service as much as possible. So you want to do enough planned maintenance to keep them safe and reliable, but just enough, right? You don't want to take them out of service more than necessary, right? The biggest thing that you want to avoid is in-service failures. You don't want to have a bus that has a failure that occurs while you have a bunch of passengers on board. That requires you to offload, get a new bus, right? Bring that one back.
I've lived through that example actually once.
Sorry to hear that. And it could have been due to this. I'm not gonna name the transit property, but there was one that was having issues with their services being interrupted by wiper blades failing. Okay, it's a safety issue if it starts to rain and the wiper blades are not clearing the windshield, and so they had a considerable amount of service interruptions due to the wiper blades failing, right? They didn't realize this until quite a bit into the issue, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't necessarily tracking the cause well, but once they started to, they realized this was an issue, and they made a decision to change the wiper blades and buy really heavy duty wiper blades that had like 3 rubber, blades in one, right? So problem solved, right? Except they started to fail at a much higher rate.
Why is that?
And the reason why is they did not use good engineering best practice, right? Which I think is a asset management principle to evaluate whether that solution would work. And the reason they failed, that 3-bladed wiper blade caused, it required a lot more pressure to move it across the windshield. And so the connector that connected it to the motor was breaking. And so it was failing.
Okay, got it.
And so it's kind of I don't know if that's an exact answer to your question, but if they were using good asset management practices, they would have known it was an issue earlier, and then they would have been following proper design change principles to evaluate, maybe pilot that before they use that, 3-bladed wiper blade.
we know that we have an aging infrastructure, and we know that there are always capital constraints. And what is the impact of agencies making those decisions of what gets into the capital plan and what gets out of the capital plan, and how do you manage those critical assets that don't make it in the capital plan?
Great question.
How do you advise your clients?
So I look at it as there's two sides to this coin, right? There's things you need to do for the assets that you're going to keep, right? And those things, the majority of the funding for that is operating expense, right? And most of our clients have fixed operating expense budgets, right? Mm-hmm. It's not as variable as capital budgets where you can get federal grants, right? So for those assets that need to carry on, right, and stay healthy and reliable, to me, what I would be advising our clients to be doing is to be really optimizing the maintenance of those assets, right? Because you need to be as efficient as possible in turning wrenches judiciously, right? Do it where it's needed, but don't waste your time doing things that don't really impact the reliability of assets. And so there's techniques to deploy for just that. Things like reliability-centered maintenance, maintenance optimization techniques, looking at your data and evaluating whether you're doing, first of all, the right schedule, right? I'm doing this every month. Well, things don't normally wear, our assets don't normally wear based on, the rotation of the Earth around the sun, right? And so why a month, right?
Right.
Why not 45 days? Why not, some other metric? So on the operating side, looking at what you were doing, eliminating unneeded maintenance, and then focusing on where your issues are with reliability-centered maintenance and that sort of thing, right? On the capital side, the thing that our clients in the industry should be looking at, they should be evaluating the state of good repair of their assets regularly. Federal government has guidelines for them to do that. Some of our clients take it very seriously, right? And go beyond just meeting that federal mandate that the FDA put out there for reporting on the state of good repair of their assets. Some people just answer the mail on it. But if you're doing that correctly, you can leverage data out of your EAM, right? You can be assessing the condition of your assets as you are maintaining them, and then forecasting when your capital needs are, right? Hey, this rail car should have a useful life of 15 years, right? We're at year 10. The condition of it is, maybe a 2 out of a 5. It might not make it to 15 years, right? Leveraging data out of your EAM to kind of forecast when you need to replace that, right? And be ahead of the curve so you know when you need that budget secured for it.
We talked about that the industry is not ready for IoT and AI and how that can help RCM. Where do you think we are? How far away are we to be at the point where we can leverage those types of technologies?
So Internet of Things, I think we've been there for a long time. Internet of Things, for me, it's a concept that's been around a long time, right? And it just has a catchphrase that's been assigned to it. But it's really just instrumenting your assets such that they tell you when they need maintenance, right? Going back to when I was in the Navy and we were implementing condition-based maintenance, it was all about putting temperature sensors, pressure sensors, et cetera, throughout the system so that they would tell us when there was a repair that needed to be made, right? If the differential pressure across the pump was falling, then we knew that the slip rings within that pump needed to be replaced. That's a concept that's very well alive today in transit. Arguably, it could be expanded quite a bit, right? I think there's a lot, particularly today, there's a lot of assets that our transit properties are using that are heavily instrumented, and maybe we're not leveraging that data to the maximum extent to really tell us, hey, it's time to maintain this thing. On the artificial intelligence side, so I worked for Trapeze prior to coming to WSP, and the CEO of Constellation Software, the company that owns Trapeze, was fortunate enough to be able to ask him a question one time at a meeting. And I asked him about AI. I said, hey, when are we going to jump into this game, right? Our clients should be benefiting from artificial intelligence. And he told me and the rest of my peers, he brought up IBM. And he said, well, IBM spent over $1 billion on developing an artificial intelligence solution called Watson, that can compete on Jeopardy, right? And he's like, it's very impressive. At the time, 2018, they hadn't made a single dollar in revenue from artificial intelligence in Watson yet. And he said, but they will, right? And it's not going to be our client base. It's going to be, the finance firms and that sort of thing that IBM is first going to start with, and then, maybe DoD. And 15 years down the line is when those products are likely going to be available for us to incorporate into our solutions. I feel like we're still, a ways away from using it. I have not seen an example yet. I'm hopeful and I'm waiting, right? But I don't think it's here yet for us.
Okay. Can you talk about a success story, an EAM success story from that WSP has implemented or is implementing?
The first one that I think is a great success for WSP and our clients, Port Authority, New York, New Jersey. Port Authority, New York, New Jersey has several business lines, right, that it manages, bridges and tunnels, World Trade Center, and the airports, the three major airports. And they were all leveraging different technologies from an enterprise asset management solution perspective. They hired WSP to help them determine basically what are our alternatives and what should we do, right? And then help us go achieve that. We were fortunate enough to be able to do that with them and decided, hey, you should really have one enterprise asset management solution that's being leveraged by all of your subunits. That solution is Maximo. We help them to come to the determination of we should really be working off of one system, going through the procurement, the selection, and now we helped them implement the very first implementation of Maximo. The airports were on a mainframe software that was aging out of viable usage. And so we helped them stand that up very quickly so that the airports could transition over to it, and then help them with the procurement process for vendors to do full-blown implementations for EAM solutions for all of the sub business lines. We're still working with them today, but it's been a very successful project for them, and I think a great example of the type of support that we can give our clients. Other one that I think has been a great success for both WSP and our client is a project that I'm working on today, and it's for Washington Metro. It's called the COO's Maintenance Efficiency Effort. And I want to say around 2019-ish timeframe, WMATA had basically put in for federal capital funding grants from Maryland, Virginia, and DC as well, right? They got it approved with the caveat that, hey, we're giving you all this money, all this capital funding. We expect the cost to maintain your assets to not increase, right? To at least stay flat, if not decrease. And so they hired us to help them basically to find ways to get more efficient in doing maintenance. We've done a number of initiatives with them that have been very successful, just leveraging information out of their enterprise asset management system, right? And when we first started that journey, there was a lot of concern from the different departments, right? Because here comes another consultant. They've got consultant fatigue, right? They're constantly having consultants come in and tell them how to do things better. We were no different, right? And we were starting from a data set that they felt was imperfect, right? Their data coming out of their enterprise asset management system. Fortunately, the data was, I think, much better than they give it credit for, and allowed us to pinpoint, first of all, where are you spending the most money to maintain, and where are you having the most costly failures, and target those asset classes for improvement initiatives. And we had some very successful initiatives that we implemented, looking at things like whether they were maintaining on the right schedule, right? Whether they were actually maintaining the most efficiently, right? Are you leveraging your staff the most efficiently on these activities? And had some very significant gains. Another part of that project was to implement what I'll call digital forms for them, right? Similar to a lot of their peers in the industry, they're still doing maintenance and recording it on paper, right? And moving to digital is always a challenge for an organization, because you have, these devices that you now have to track, right? They have to be hardened and secured for your organization. So it's got to have the security, the endpoint control. You have to train people. You have to put software on it. You have to manage that software. You have to manage that hardware. You have to train people on how to use it. And so it's not as simple as just making a form, right? It's a huge change management initiative.
Right.
With WMATA, we had the opportunity to implement digital maintenance for both their rail car maintenance department as well as their signaling department. And so I would suggest those two projects are the ones that I look at as examples of some great things that we've done with our clients.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was not aware that you guys were involved with the Port Authority and helping them implement Maximo. I think that I've seen their department. I remember when they created their EAM department, and I've seen it grow over the years. So that's really nice to know that you guys had a hand in that. What one thing that you'll see in this industry, from an EAM perspective, that you would predict would be completely different in 25 years?
Oh, good Lord. Well, I do think the more people leverage, an Internet of Things mentality, I do think we will be seeing more and more predictive maintenance. Right now, particularly within transit, they're very reliant on OEM recommendations for maintenance, right? And I think overly reliant, right? As we talked about, I was a design engineer. managing and developing the maintenance regime for a couple of systems that now there's sailors maintaining, a ship by, right? And while we did the best we could, it wasn't like we were doing failure testing and that sort of thing, right? And if I had the data that those shipboard personnel have today, I definitely would be tweaking that maintenance regime. And I think transit properties need to get more comfortable with that, right? Like, more comfortable with, okay, the OEM did the best they could, but we've been maintaining this thing for 10 years and we've got a significant amount of data, and so we should now be adjusting our maintenance regime. I think the more things get instrumented and the more comfortable they get with modifying those maintenance plans, I think the more we will see the industry going towards a predictive maintenance mode, right? So only take the asset out when our data is telling us it needs to be taken out and repaired.
If you could teleport to work, what piece of infrastructure would you not miss maintaining?
Kind of a double-edged sword, but it's escalators, right? And escalators are out all the time in transit. And while I should be happy to climb stairs, I always seem disappointed when it is out, right? And it's definitely a challenging asset class for our clients to maintain, if you think about it, because they have to live in an environment with a swing of at least 100 degrees, right? They,
True.
Sub-zero temperatures all the way up to 110, 115, very humid to very dry conditions. Sometimes they have to deal with ice. Sometimes they have to deal with sand, And so it's not surprising that they fail as often as they do. But it is the thing that I would love to avoid, right? If I could teleport, goodbye to escalators. Yeah, and there's also what I've learned is there's not many people that are in that profession, right? Mechanics for escalators, and there's not a lot of firms out there that provide that service. I know Washington Metro does it internally, but it's a challenging skill set to hire for, right? So I think it's one of those things that transit operators are always chasing, right, is keeping those escalators up.
Right, and I know that we're very challenged when we are looking for skill sets to do the commissioning on escalators and elevators. They're really hard to find. They're unicorns sometimes.
Yeah. That's what I've learned from my client base, right? It's hard to find those resources. Trying to think if there's other topic of interest. I will say there is one thing that I like to share when I get the chance. I've done a couple of RCM efforts, reliability-centered maintenance workshops, with a partner company of ours, Aladon. In Aladon, they're the authors of RCM 3 and 2. And so they're kind of leading the way in RCM practices and technology. And one of the things that they have accumulated over doing hundreds, if not thousands, of RCM workshops across various asset classes, both for transit, manufacturing, you name it, they've been there. 84% of the failure modes that occur out there in the world are not time related, right? So the longer that asset lives, it has no relation to whether it's going to fail or not.
Interesting.
And I would say 90% of our maintenance that we perform is time-based maintenance, right? So those two things are out of whack, right? I would love to see our client base get more comfortable with that fact, right? And stop checking things that are just as likely to fail tomorrow as they are next week, as they were the day before. Because if I look at it today, I didn't improve the odds of me intervening at all for things that just randomly fail, which is 84% of the failure trends. So I think there is a great opportunity to look at those failure modes and look at your maintenance plans. And if you are inspecting for those things, get them out of your maintenance plan. Get more efficient. Save that time for something else you could be doing.
I just want to thank you for having this conversation with me about EAM and providing your insights, and really looking forward to working with you. And thanks for being a guest on our podcast.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it, Fred.
Same here. Take care.